So good morning. I'm Carlotta Minnella. I'm a research fellow at the Migration Policy Center, and it is my great pleasure this morning to welcome our speaker for this week's seminar, Contesting Migration Crisis in Central and Eastern Europe, a political economy approach to Poland's responses towards refugee protection, which is also a book that came out last month with Palgrave Macmillan. Our speaker today is Diego Caballero Vélez, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Messina under the PRIN project SHATMed, Securitizing Human Transit Across the Central Mediterranean Migratory Corridor. He received his PhD at the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies and spent visiting periods at the Refugee Studies Center at Oxford, the Migration Policy Center here at the EUY, and the SGH Warsaw School of Economics. And his research focuses mainly on international migration governance, political economy, and EU foreign policy. So please join me in welcoming Diego. Thank you. And just very briefly, in terms of housekeeping, we will have about 20-25 minutes for the talk, and then we will take questions from the audience and online. For those of you who are joining us online, welcome. You can write your questions in the chat or raise your hand and ask them directly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlotta, and thank you very much for everyone that are here and on premise and online. Thanks to the MPC that has allowed me to present the monograph just published 1 month ago, and in this seminar. Well, I would like to make like very light presentation that is not an exam or either our ongoing publications. I'm more about to present what this book is about. It started as part of my PhD dissertation, and after the recent events in 2021 in the Polish-Belarus border crisis and with the 2022 Ukraine refugee crisis, I modified a little bit in order to get published and analyzing both recent situations. And the main scope of the book is to try to understand the different approaches of member states in the EU towards similar situations of migration crisis. And I try to understand what is behind this security humanitarian approach that commonly we see in the member states' approach to refugee protection. Apart from that, one of the interests of writing this book has been to try to apply in order to understand this kind of different attitudes from member states, a political economy approach. The book tries to give some insights about literature that has already explored to what extent public goods theory and collective action theory can give some insights about the different rationale of states towards the provision of refugee protection. And I try to understand public goods theory and the different costs and benefits from what that can emanate from the provision of refugee protection from a more context and constructivist approach theoretical framework. So kind of background. First of all, the data that is provided in the book is data from before the events of 2021, 2022. So I've analyzed data from since 2015 till 2018. The point is that to some extent, these data that are coming from policy documents, party manifesto, the main policy, the political party was in the government in Poland till last October, to some extent predict what happened later, what was the approach of the Polish government after in these events. So in 2015 and 2016, we had this massive influx of refugees attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea, also to try to reach the EU through other routes, such as, for instance, the Balkan route. And the approach of member states were kind of a lack of solidarity. We have the European Commission then with the new agenda on migration enacted the refugee emergency relocation scheme, that was mandatory for member states to allocate a number of refugees into their territories. And we see that in this situation, most of member states, or many of them that were reluctant to cooperate on that, were coming from Central Eastern region, Visegrad Group countries, specifically in this case, Poland and Hungary. Later on, we see a similar, but with another kind of nature crisis in 2021. Some migrants coming from mostly from Belarus, and they were coming from Pakistan and other Eastern countries. So the countries of origins, they were similar to the ones of the refugee crisis in 2015, 2016. And they were trying to attempt to reach the European borders through Lithuanian, Latvian, and Polish borders. This was the first time that the European Commission started to talk to European institutions to talk about migration, frame migration as a hybrid threat. Migrants that were coming here because of kind of orchestrated plan by Lukashenko and Putin. So this is the context of the aftermath of the Ukrainian war. And here we see a similar approach to the one 2015 and 2016. The difference of that is that the nature of the hybrid threat, we were not talking about hybrid threat in that period of time, but started to talk about this in 2021. The approach of Poland was to militarize the border and to enact pushbacks against migrants. In this case, the European Commission acquiescence was very interesting because the European Commission was supporting Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland approach because it was kind of hybrid threat, no? What was considered this group of migrants. There was no obligation to allocate these migrants, and the interesting point here is the Polish government, the former Prime Minister of Poland, Morawiecki, changed the approach towards the EU. Instead of 2015, 2016 was against the EU, like kind of, we have to allocate these refugees, we were not doing that. And in this case, Morawiecki called for a stand together. We have to stand together, member states, and we have to call for a European response in order to fight or face up with this hybrid threat. And later, 1 year, just 1 year later, few months later, the Russian military aggression towards Ukraine led to many migrants to come to the EU, and the approach of Poland was completely different. They the same government had a completely changed the approach in just 4 or 5 months, and they allocate over 1.5 million of refugees coming from Ukraine. Completely different of the 2015, 2016. The solidarity was, there was a solidarity sharing among member states, and a directive was not enacted till now and was born in 2001. The temporary protection directive was the first time it was enacted during this situation, not in 2015, not for sure in 2021, but in 2022. So the rationale of the book is that Poland, it's an interesting case study because we have a completely different double approach in similar situations. Also, the book seeks to understand that these dynamics of lack of cooperation, refugee protection can be understood under collective action theory. The collective action theory is a theory that's coming from the political economy and tries to understand to what extent states cooperate or not in situations of crisis. And later, after with the roots of with the framework of this of the collective action theory, to try to understand to what extent conceptualize refugee protection as a public good can give us some interesting insights in burden sharing and responsibility sharing dynamics in the EU, to try to understand the different costs and benefits, how these costs and benefits are perceived by different states can gives us some image how these states are going to behave in different situations of migration crisis. So the contribution of the book is there are 3 points here. First of all, it's empirical. A part of that, it's trying to analyze a very novel situation, because there's been some research going on of these situations, but still that a lack of publications about that because of the novelty of the situation, and to put some light on the refugee protection responsibility sharing dynamics. I prefer rather to talk about responsibility sharing instead of burden sharing, because when we talk about burden sharing, we are like taking for granted that they are just costs, and the costs has to be shared by the states, but it's not about just benefits. So also there are some benefits about allocating refugees. The theoretical part is in order to understand how an understanding of the identity, how the identity and norms and the context of the states, of permanent states, influence in the perception of costs and benefits. It's not just about logic of consequence that has been normally the approach that has been used in collective action theory and public good theory, but it's in order to understand where these benefits and costs come from, what the identity, what is the political part in the government, why the benefits for you are completely different from the benefits from to other states. And in this case, we move into the part of the conceptual contribution, that what is the nature itself of refugee protection. Refugee protection constitutes a pure public good, or is more impure public goods with also private benefits to the states that allocate refugees, for instance, economic contribution, international prestige. So to try to understand what are also the private incentives of member states in contributing to refugee protection. So the overview of the action of the monograph, I started to claim that refugee protection may constitute a collective action dilemma, a collective action problem, in which states have different perceptions of whether to allocate or not refugees. Later, normally there is a lack of responsibility sharing and burden sharing, and this provide some kind of differences of why we should, or why member states should allocate or not refugees, and we moving from the theoretical framework to the conceptual part. If we see that there is a kind of different perception of costs and benefits, how we can conceptualize, based on previous literature, refugee protection as a public good. So there are different benefits and costs, and how we can predict the different attitudes of states from the analysis of these benefits and costs. How to analyze the nature of the refugee protection as a public good. We move into the part of methodology, and the book seeks to analyze different frames showing a dichotomy of security and an humanitarian approach, and to what extent we see how Poland can perceive refugees coming from Eastern European region as economic contributors, as a kind of benefits as well, for kind of putting Poland in a good position in the international realm, or on the other hand, Middle Eastern refugees as a cost, as a security threat. So we are not talking here about what is the legal status of these migrants, but these migrants before reaching Poland, how the benefits and costs, how they are framed before they asking or not for the status of refugee. So the case of Poland is very interesting because we see now in Poland, as many former Soviet ex-Soviet states, and that recently in 2004 they were part of the enlargement process of the EU. Kind of clash of nation building processes. In the case of Poland, we see how these different ideas of poly-nation, of poly-society, they are represented by what is now the government that is led by Tusk, by Prime Minister Tusk, with a coalition with other center-left political parties. But Platform is the main political party here that represents a more progressive, a more pro-European vision of Poland. And on the other hand, till last October, what was the main political party in Poland that was led by Morawiecki, but the Kaczynski, and that represents more and more conservative idea of Poland, anti-Europeanist country, more in the idea of this kind of Polishness, of the identity, of the ethnicity of Poles, and everything that is against this kind of idea of Poland is seen as an enemy, is a kind of seen as alien for the Polish interest. So analyzing and providing this idea is very interesting, because it's important to see how in the past, how the Polish government framed the different types of migrants. What could represent a national threat for the Polish society? What could represent a contribution for the Polish society in terms of economy or whatever? Why? Because kind of the identity and the context depending is very important to understand later how, to what extent, these costs and benefits of providing or not providing refugee protection are framed. So the data, as I was pointing out before, it's a period that is before the events in 2021, 2022, and it referred to parliamentary debates, to peace, law, and justice politicians' official speeches. Also, the official party manifesto that is very interesting. It's very interesting to see. I remember a few paragraphs in which you could specifically see how they are framing, for instance, Ukrainians, and how they support Ukrainians in Poland, and how they are perceiving Middle Eastern migrants that they have to, like border securitization and etc. So also in the party manifesto, we can see that, and later some, in order to support this data, some interviews with Polish migration and asylum experts. It's also interesting to see that I asked during the writing of the PhD dissertation, I tried many times to contact peace politicians in Brussels, in Warsaw, at local level and regional level. None of them, they were willing to answer my questions about migration policy. So first of all, I tried to make an identification of frames, and later a qualitative analysis of the data, and later I tried to quantify the frames in order to see the percentage of the different narratives and frames of the documents and of the parliamentary debates and the manifesto. Here, there are other graphics, and the data analysis is more complex than that. But I just wanted to show you in just few graphics how the benefits and costs are framed they were framed by the Polish government. Here we see the percentage, 33% represent that a total of the documents that they were referring to, specifically Eastern European migrants. There was this percentage, and the other in total about migration, they were talking about Middle Eastern migrants. So as we can see here, out of this percentage, we see half of the narrative they were perceiving, or the Polish government was perceiving, Eastern European migrants as economic contributors. So we can see here this kind of benefit of this kind of migrants coming to Poland because they are perceived kind of, they can contribute to the economy of the country. There is like almost nothing, no mention of these migrants as a kind of security threat, or they can perceive as a security national threat for the Polish society, or as criminals or terrorists or nothing like that. And I see, and the book also is referring that Eastern European migrants are very close in identity terms to what is how peace government was perceived, this kind of Polishness of this identity of what Poland is. And so we see that the different frames of providing or not providing refugee protection to Eastern European migrants depends on how the government was perceiving them. Also, in terms of, even if it's Eastern European migrants, they were not coming because there were few numbers of these migrants coming to Poland or asking for protection. But the Polish government was seeing them as a kind of deceiving net. They deserve this protection in case they need it. During the analysis of the data, most of the narratives they were coming from, framing, or they were mentioning Belarusian migrants instead of Ukrainians. They were these kind of big groups of in the analysis of the documents. They were on the one hand Belarusian migrants because it was the situation in which many demonstrations were happening in Minsk against Lukashenko government. And so there was kind of a concern from the Polish government that kind of massive influx of refugees, migrants coming from Belarus could attempt to cross the Polish border. On the other hand, in few numbers, they were referring to Ukrainians, but they were referring to Ukrainians more as economic contributors, not as potential refugees. On the other hand, we see the narrative towards Middle Eastern migrants. No, the number of the percentage of the frame is very low in comparison with when it comes to perceive them as a security in comparison with Eastern European migrants. And on the other hand, as economic contributors. On the other hand, we see that the percentage, how they are perceived as a security threat, is very high. Even if they are not, even if they could provide economic contribution to Poland, even they are doctors, even if they have all PhDs, even they are high qualified migrants, they are perceived more as a terrorist, more as a potential criminals, because they are far away from what they are conceived as the Polish identity, they are considered as what is Poland for them. So in general, broadly speaking, the book identify some benefits and costs from the public good, claiming that refugee protection is not, and also coming from some literature, supported by some literature, that refugee protection itself is not a pure public good, but it's a pure public good that has private benefits for the states that allocate refugees, and also that restrict some benefits to other states, providing also or leading to some kind of free-riding dynamics. That the identity and norms of states are crucial to understand the frames and the costs and benefits of the public good. So when we talk about refugee protection as a public good, we cannot talk about a logic or consequence, more benefits than costs, but we have to go what is inside that and what are like the frames inside this, where they are coming, these benefits and costs. And the nature of the public good service constructed is socially constructed and is context dependent, and it changes depending on the situation. And concluding in the in just the last sentence is that to some extent, what I was surprised it's that actually these results predicted to some extent what was the approach later with the massive influx of Ukrainian refugees, because the main conclusion of the monograph was that in the case of a massive influx of Ukrainians or Belarusians attempting to cross the Polish borders, the Polish government, at least the last Polish government was in the power, it would enhance an open door policy, completely different what happened in 2015 and 2016. So I will conclude here the presentation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diego. That was perfect, 25 minutes.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, now we can open the floor for questions from the audience. Maybe I can collect 2 or 3 and then. Yes, Claire.
Thanks so much, Diego. Sorry, I was a few minutes late, so I didn't catch the very beginning of the presentation, nor have I had a chance to read the book, but interested in the general approach. I suppose one of the questions for me would be, when you did your analysis, how do you discern between framing and rhetoric? So you look at the policy documents, which was your kind of main methodological approach, as I understood it. And so there's a lot of framing there. So how do you discern that from actual norms and beliefs of the government? So, this idea that the government perceives refugees in certain ways as a public good or not, how do we know from the analysis that you've done that the framing of this is not just a guise for some sort of political interest or other factors that maybe have nothing to do with norms or identity? So that's one question. And then the other point in the slide, you mentioned, the Catholic kind of norms and the Catholic culture of Poland. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on your kind of understanding of, of this perception of public goods, how it comes about, how you see it arriving historically, culturally, these types of things. That'd be great. Thank you.
I'll collect 2 more and then Lenka.
Thank you, Diego, for a very interesting talk. So I would be curious to hear your thought on, given what you just presented, for example, recently, many countries were considering giving Russians refugee status, the ones that flew Russia because of the obligatory military service and so on, whereas for Poland, as well as other Central Eastern European countries and Baltic countries, absolutely refused to even consider Russians to be to give them refugee status. So in what you just presented, this is clearly a little bit different because they are ethnically similar, so how would you explain in terms of theory this completely different approach to Russians from these governments? So thank you.
Maybe you can start answering this too, because I think they're pretty.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. Well, this was one of the trickiest part of the PhD dissertation. How to frame benefits and costs just from the policy documents and from the. So it's why I conducted interviews. This is one of the reasons. And the interviews, I have to say that they were not coming from politicians itself, but they were, most of them, working closely with politicians from the government. So they were like answering the questions about what we are seeing when we are working with them. And this, I think that we are the perceptions and how they also construct this perception and they transport them into policy and into policy documents. In the book, I try to be very conscious of how to construct the different frames. After the frames, I identify some subframes in order to be very, very specific on to what extent for instance, the benefit of economic contribution is framed by different subframes, different subgroups, like when they are referring to I don't know, employment, education, etc., access to education, like super specific. Later, I construct this perception cost benefit from these kind of little subframes. What I can say is that in the case of Poland, actually, maybe most of countries, but specifically in the case of Poland, we see that policy documents are, in the case of migration, giving a clear message about what is the identity of this political party, what is the norms, what are the norms of this political party, and how they perceive this political party, the project of Poland, the vision of Poland. And so what it was with the party manifesto was the same. What was a little bit different, it was to try to identify this kind of approach when it was coming from official speeches, because the prime minister before the Morawiecki, Beata Szweko, I'm sorry for my Polish pronunciation, but the official speech of her when she was presenting the migration situation, the migration policy at the European Parliament, and later at the Congress, the policy in the same at the Polish Congress, they were completely different. But it was very difficult to identify how these identity as elements they were constructed when they were, for instance, giving these official speeches in the European institutions, because they were changing a little bit. Yes. So it has been one of the trickiest parts, but if you see in the book, I identify the small elements of the identity into the subframes, and later these subframes you can see that in the different analysis of the documents. And for sure, later it was needed a support of interviews, because if not, there was kind of a risk of lack of real empirical data. Yeah. Identities. I talk in the book. I provide a kind of model that is called identity utility model. So the utilitarian, I didn't want to talk about this in the presentation. Maybe it was giving a little bit of confusion. Normally, the provision of the public good through logic of consequence, like more benefits and costs. This model is trying to understand to what extent the utility of states increase because of the identity. So we have to analyze the identity and identity party, in this case, the party identity, the identity of the political party, because we cannot talk about an identity of Poland. Is very complex. So what is the party identity of peace? So we are seeing that they are like promoving, Catholic values, the typical traditional idea of family, the idea of Polishness. This is also very crucial, because the identity that they claim that there is kind of ethnicity, of Polish ethnicity. So, for instance, in this case, Polish ethnicity is closer to the ethnicity of Ukrainians, of maybe Belarusians. So this kind of, so yeah, and I don't know. And later, this is the model. So what is behind this logic of consequences if we are not taking into consideration identity of the actor itself? In this case, it's a political party, but it could be another political actor perfectly. And Linka, so this is related with her question. In this case, peace, see one of the claims of the identitarian, most important identitarian elements of peace is that they are against Russia, but not just because of now the war. Like, they are against Russia. They have a very skeptical approach towards Germany. also, for instance, not just this German government, but also when it was Merkel and the power. And this is coming from the past. So these kind of historical roots, and they are also enhancing this narrative that we are close to Ukrainians, we have to support Ukrainians, but because we see that as a victims of the historical enemy of us, that is Russia. Yeah.
Just a quick, but this is not particular to peace, to Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, because this is any Polish party, any Polish government
Yeah,
is
sure.
historically against Russia.
Sure.
So there is, you cannot distinguish between peace and any other party.
No, for sure. And this is why normally the migration policy in Poland is not gonna change a lot with the change of the shift of government. And we have to expect that as well, because when Tusk came to power, one of many experts and many policymakers were like, maybe there's going to be a change of the approach. Absolutely no. Maybe some attempts. So we have to expect the same situation on the Polish-Belarus situation. Like nothing has changed there. And the migration policy, the Polish migration policy is going to be completely, very similar to that. Why? Because in identitarian terms, it's close to that, and influences very little to that. So this is crucial as well to see how the change of the chief of government is not going to change anything because of that, because these two political parties are coming from the same roots, are coming from Solidarność movement against the power of the Soviet Union, etc. So. And this is crucial. These elements are crucial to understand what is how migration policies are constructed in these countries. I wouldn't say just Poland. I would say it's very important to understand these dynamics, also to understand how Central Eastern European countries enhance their migration policies.
Thank you. Now we have Andrew, Eleonora, and Irataka, and then we have a question from the online.
Thanks, Diego. Congratulations on the book, which I've not had time to read because I was reading the 400-page book we're discussing at 12, so I didn't have time to look at yours. I'm just trying to understand this kind of constructivist political economy approach. So you focus on costs and benefits. Presumably that creates a structure of incentives that the actors you're interested in respond to. But what it's generating is a suboptimal outcome because certain actors have a strong interest, I would suspect, politically in pursuing approaches that you would see as suboptimal. They've rewarded politically and electorally by doing it. And then, well, how do you change that? How do you change incentives? And the constructivist thing seems to be telling me, well, you can't because it's embedded in our identities and these are going to not be able to change. So essentially, you're trapped in a kind of, from your perspective, a deeply suboptimal outcome, which actually is rewarding for some of the actors who pursue it. And am I missing, is that essentially what you're saying, or am I missing something? This kind of constructivist political economy.
Eleonora?
Yeah, thank you very much, Diego, and congrats on the book. So I just add two quick questions. The first one is, again, following on from your key claim that costs and benefits are perceived differently, and the arguments from identity and utility that you elaborated on. I was wondering whether you think that this applies to the EU level too, because we have seen sort of different responses to displacement from Ukraine across the EU, and obviously with the activation of the TPD, or the activation of the TPD in itself marked a shift in the EU's approach to displacement, and so I was towards the EU. So I was wondering whether you think that the same could apply with some variations to the EU level, and what role identity might have in that case. And then the second question would be, to what extent in the book you take issues with the notion of refugee crisis or border crisis, because I think, and how your findings speak to the understanding that what we call crises are in fact largely the extent of flaws in asylum and migration governance, but also conflicting domestic agendas, politicization, and so on. So yes, just wondering whether you will also say something about this crisis sort of discourse that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for interesting talks. And I didn't have time to read the book, so I apologize for that. But my first question is slightly overlap with previous question, but it's you in the presentation, you basically start with some like a responsibility sharing and collective action theory and public goods and so on. But I didn't see how these kind of theoretical framework actually come into play in the empirical part of the presentation. So I didn't read the book. So maybe you discussed this point, but how kind of theory and empirics is actually connected in your analysis. And that is one point. And also, I think studying the Polish case is interesting, but why studying the Poland case is so interesting in relation to your theory or theoretical frameworks you kind of develop in this book? This is some related question. And in the second one is about the empirics is not so surprising to me, but I don't still kind of struggle to understand why the migrants or refugees coming from Middle East cannot become the economic contributor for the Polish government. So identity terms, they are probably not they're of course not the Catholic, but they can provide some contribution to the economy in some capacity. So how kind of the interview question you can actually, or your research team is kind of framing in the actual interview process. And the third question is very small comment, but you just mentioned that Ukraine migration started from kind of 2011, but in my understanding, Ukraine migration to Poland is already starting in 2014. So how kind of the time frame can change potentially? Thanks.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah, so this the thing of constructivism and rational choice is this idea is explained in the book, and the book or the analysis itself doesn't seek to criticize the rational choice nature of collective of the provision of public goods. So what I try to understand is what is the constructivist nature itself of the rational choice framework in the provision of public goods. So there is not a claim of criticizing the rational choice. We cannot understand the provision of refugee protection just from that perspective, but there is something there is a lack in the literature about, okay, we are understanding there is a collective action dilemma, but what is the rationale of states behind that? It's just because some states perceive these refugees as a benefit, but what is the benefit? What is coming this benefit from some? So is that the policies of these states are operationalized from a rational way, but there is kind of context there that is influencing this policymaking process. So there is not a neglect of the rational choice theoretical approach. Is kind of to understand what is the constructivist and context-dependent nature of this rational choice theoretical framework itself. I don't know if so, well, this is very interesting question, indeed, Eleonora, because the EU, this approach, I mean, I think that this can be applied to different political actors and also into international organizations. Actually, I do think that the EU has a double approach here as well. And because if we see the roots of the European Union, we see also kind of what is the identity of what is the European identity itself. And we see we're coming back from the 50s, the 60s, and later what has been the European project. There is also some kind of elements, for instance, Christianity and etc. Some elements that can give us some insights about what are the values of the European Union project. So if we go deeper into that, for sure, later we can see that to some extent migration policy has and is influenced by this kind of identity. The question here is that there are many states, there are many micro realities, and the European projects and European identity itself is very complex. And but if we see, and that this was the collective response of the member states and many like journals, and why this approach towards Ukrainians has been completely different. And many of them, they were talking about that they were closer to us. At the same happened in Yugoslav refugee crisis in the 90s. There was a huge response and solidarity sharing among states. It was completely similar situations as Ukrainians now. In the 90s, the European project itself were kind of with the Treaty of Maastricht, etc. So it was very like Europeans like opening their arms to Yugoslavians. Why? Because they were different, they were similar, there were many Yugoslavians, they were Muslims. So what is the purpose of the European Union in order to, for sure there are other political issues. In that case, there was kind of integration process of these countries. And now there is an ongoing process to put Russia as the enemy of the EU. So it's also kind of playing with this kind of values and the political tools. So, but it would be very interesting to see. But in order to unpack European identity, it's maybe what is the cabinet in the European Commission could be an interesting starting point. Maybe to see what is the identitarian or the identity of the different cabinet of European Commission, and it has some kind of influences later to see different, to have a different approach towards different group of migrants. But yeah. The collective action theory actually is a theory in which it was like the roots with trying to the scholars in the 70s to try to understand the different contribution of states in NATO. So why there were some states that were contributing more in economic terms to NATO, as members of NATO, and some of them no. So this started with some scholars to start to think about there was a collective action dilemma in defense terms, in defense policy. And this was causing some free riding problem. Some members of NATO contributing more to the expenses of the organization itself in the period of the Cold War, but the collective benefits of defense, it was for all the members of NATO, not just for the ones that were contributing more in economic terms. So this was the origins of collective action. So to try to understand the free riding problems and free riders, to what extent later public goods, in this case defense, or we can talk about international peace, in this case refugee protection, provide benefits to all states, not considering what are the states that are like providing or not or contributing more or not. In the case of refugee protection in the EU, we see that if some member states are providing refugee protection, the benefits of these protections, this protection of these specific member states are like being benefits. There are the other member states that are being benefited from these benefits. So for sure, there are some member states that are not providing refugee protection, but taking advantage of the benefits that the others do. So this is the point or the reason of the collective action theory. Yeah, sure.
So you should turn off the mic, I think. So I understand what the collective action problem is and how it works, but my question is more how this theory is actually playing into your analysis, or how your analysis actually contribute to this theory. So that is my question.
Providing the constructivist approach. So normally this theory is just a logic of consequences, and has been purely analyzed in mathematical way. So if we see that what is the reason of the contributors in identity terms, we can go further and in order to understand what is actually the nature of the collective action dilemma in this situation. And later, the situation of Crimea. There were not, during the crisis of Crimea in 2014, actually, there were not so many asylum seekers from Ukraine. And the ones also you can see that in because there was one of the interviews, the experts interview. There was kind of concern as well of massive influx of refugees during this period by the Polish government, and they started to plan a kind of contingency plan for this kind of situation that never happened. Most of Ukrainians that reached Poland, they were because they already had relatives in Poland. They had some kind of roots there, so they were few, like even less than 100 of requests of international protection in that situation. Some kind, like in 2022. The numbers has increased for sure because of the number of migrants, but still most of migrants coming from Ukraine, they are not, they were not coming as refugees themselves, but also because they have some connections with Poland. And later there, they maybe ask for the international protection status.
And we have one last question from the audience, Isabella.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a couple of very quick questions and a small comment. The first question relates to one of the conclusions about benefits and costs for the states. You made a remark about the lack of responsibility sharing among the states. And I was wondering if you could comment on the fact that the similar dynamic can be remarked in some of the member states inside in the relationship between different regions when it comes to the distribution of the migrants. One particular example is Spain, where the lack of solidarity between regions for taking responsibility for those who arrive is pretty persistent. And one can say that there is a sort of like a similarity which comes to the eye first for these things. And it is the fact that at the EU level and at the level of those member states that confront such internal problems, there is no powerful federal government. So it's not a strictly federalized system in which the responsibility sharing is being contested. The second question was about the identities. Identities and norms. I'm thinking now about the example of Romania, because Romania is not a Catholic country. It does not have a glorious history like the one of Poland. And it doesn't have Slavic roots. So these are three distinctive features that distinguish us from Poland. And still the response was very similar to the one of Poland and other Eastern European neighboring countries when the war started in Ukraine. So I am wondering if beyond these kind of identities, which I have no doubt that they do play a role, there must be something else, some geopolitical element that is coming into play that also influences on the reaction. And then very quickly on the issue of the temporary protection and the reaction to the Ukrainian refugees. I think that very often when we talk about this, I mean, of course, there are a myriad of factors that came into play, why it was possible to trigger the temporary protection directive so quickly, and why the member states have been more willing to receive refugees from Ukraine and so on and so forth. But there is one element that I think it is important to underline. The difference between temporary protection and the refugee status. I mean, I think that the fact that this is just a temporary arrangement that everybody at the beginning was hoping was not going to last for very long, played a very important role in accepting the activation of the temporary protection directive. And then there are, of course, different institutional and other factors that came into play. Thank you.
More question. Okay. Thank you for the question. Well, if I've understood properly the first question, that if there are some benefits accrued for the neighboring countries and there are differences of solidarity sharing between the different, I mean, in regional terms. Yeah, this is this is also one of the points of the book to understand the regional nature, the regional and the global scope of refugee protection as a European public good, and to what extent, if refugee protection is provided properly by the European Union legal framework, okay, the benefits are going to be like for all member states. So, and later, but if we are talking about the European public good, it's just that the benefits of that, they are gonna be to the member states, not to other states. If we, for instance, take the case study of Visegrad Group, and if just few member states of Central Eastern European region, they are providing refugee protection, for sure there have been micro-regional benefits or cuts to the neighboring countries, because it's not the same to be a frontline member states that is like allocating or like facing up the situation of the migration crisis, that being a host country, but for instance, Germany is there and is not a frontline member state. For sure, these regional locations are important in order to understand later the different spillover effects in the neighboring countries of that. Later, for sure, I mean, the geopolitical component is crucial, but geopolitical component also is coming from the identity and how the reality is perceived by political parties. It's not the same, for instance, in the case of Poland, it's not the same if we have the peace, how reality or how peace is perceiving the reality of the Ukrainian war, or even the relationship with Germany, that, for instance, the current Polish government, because also the relationship between has been very tricky. The relationship between Germany and Poland in history, historically, and now also to what extent Poland is using this kind of power, of soft power, in order to to put them itself in a context of power in the Ukrainian war, like, for instance, giving a lot of military assistance to Ukraine and criticizing the acquiescence of German government in this question. And this for sure is coming from identity, and also is coming from to what extent the both Polish political parties are perceiving the situation, but also the relationship with Germany. And for sure, later, what is the geopolitical, how they are like using the geopolitical tools are coming from the historical roots, with historical relationship with the EU, etc. And so the Temporary Protection Directive for refugee status, the main scope of the book is not giving insights about later how are the perceptions of migrants when they are being granted with the status or with the Temporary Protection Directive. But before that, who is deserving this status? Why Middle Eastern migrants is deserving more to get the protection from a situation of war or persecution, etc., than, for instance, an Ukrainian? So, what is the perception before being granted for that? And this is also interesting to see that before that, also the policy making process is also completely different, because the Temporary Protection Directive was enacted in 2001, has been not like put into act till now. It was perfectly had to be, it was a situation in 2015 and 2016. There was a situation in which perfectly this directive could be put in act, and was completely different. So why this frame of Middle Eastern migrants, they are not deserving in this crisis like to be benefited from the directive?
Well, I'm afraid we have to stop here, but those are very important questions for further discussion. I would like to thank Diego for his great presentation, and everybody, the audience here and online, for joining us today. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon. Bye.